And next up is Rod Holt, who's going to talk about what a sustainable home looks like.
Thank you, River. Thank you very much for that, for the introduction. So, sustainable housing, what is it? We'd all like to have it, I'm sure. Sustainable to build without the use of finite materials and ideally without the use of fossil fuel. Now, we're not there yet. There aren't the supply chains and there aren't the skills in the numbers that are needed. And the Climate Change Committee is not calling for that yet either. Would be nice to have. We could mention it in our responses, but I don't think it'll get us anywhere just at the moment. It's something down the road. On the other hand, sustainable to run is something that we can ask for, because all of the technologies to make houses sustainable to run, in other words, to be able to be heated without massive CO2 emissions, all of those technologies exist already. We have a very good reason to ask for them, because if the houses are sustainable, clearly it's better for the world as a whole. It's better for the local air quality if they're not gas powered, because there's no nitrogen dioxide produced to poison us. And if they're properly built, we've got more money to spend in the shops, which is good for the town and good for ourselves as well. What we've got at the moment are houses that produce 53 tonnes for a 4-bedroom detached house to be built. World concrete industry produces 4.5% of global CO2 emissions. There's not, unfortunately, much in the short term we can do about that. So we better concentrate on running the houses in a responsible fashion. Can I have the next picture, please, Andrew? So this is a house that was built sustainably, more or less. It was built out of local stone, transported by horse and cart, dressed by hand. It might have been blasted by dynamite in the quarries, I don't know. There's no concrete in the foundations. I sometimes regret that, it moves a bit. It's got a roof made of Welsh slate, which is probably brought here by steam train. So we were nearly there in terms of sustainable construction 100 years ago, but that really is as far as we went with sustainability, because forever after that, they used tons of coal and then tons of gas to keep them warm. So although sustainable in construction, they weren't sustainable in the running. So in the future, we're looking at houses which are comfortable throughout. They've got low energy use and running costs and correspondingly low CO2 production. They'll probably be made more out of wood, but as we said, that's in the future. They might be prefabricated from local timber locally, and the prefabricated parts might be recyclable locally. But again, that's all stuff to look forward to in the future. But what we can look forward to now is better insulation in our new houses and triple glazing. In the case of the house you're looking at here, this has had better insulation and triple glazing fitted, and you can see clearly the snow remains on the roof. And it was a pretty lousy winter. That was about 10 years ago. But in spite of the cold, the heat escaping out of all the other houses to the cost of the residents melted the snow on the roofs, and on the house there, which happens to belong to me, the snow stayed on the roof, and my heating bills in this cold weather that we're having at the moment, well, today I've spent less than £1 on fuel. And that's the sort of fuel bills that could be expected in a decently insulated house heated by a modern heating installation. And Andrew, could I have the next slide, please? That means a heat pump. Now, for those that aren't familiar with heat pumps use a small amount of electric power to pump heat, in the case of this one here, from the outside air, even though it might be cold. Sounds a bit unlikely, but it can be done. And that heat is made available inside the house. So a heat pump will consume 1 kilowatt of electric power. It'll take 2.5 kilowatts of heat from the outside air, and it'll add a whole lot up, and you'll get 3.5 kilowatts of warmth inside your house. So in effect, that one has got an efficiency of 350%. You put 1 kilowatt of electrical power in, you get 3.5 kilowatts out. That's maybe a little bit optimistic. It's generally reckoned that heat pumps have an efficiency of about 300% against a gas boiler, which is about 90%. The other advantage of a heat pump is you can turn it round and it can also be used to keep the house cool in very hot conditions. Now, the Climate Change Committee, which advises the government, has established a path for zero carbon running of houses, and that will kick in 2025. That's called the Future Homes Standard. That won't apply to the first houses to be built east of Otley. But there's no reason in common sense why the houses couldn't be built to that standard. It's been estimated in a recent report based on statistics from the Climate Change Committee that it would cost an extra £4,800 on the build price of the houses to include all of the necessary insulation and energy saving measures in those houses to make them not only comfortable throughout to live in, but also zero carbon in the fullness of time when we get to 2050, when electricity is fully decarbonised, which gas can never do, by the way. Gas will always cause the emission of carbon dioxide. So when the houses are running on heat pumps and running on electricity, there will really be zero carbon. That's all dependent on them being insulated properly, because if they're not insulated properly, the electricity bills will be too high. The simple statistics are that it's more expensive to heat with electricity, even using a heat pump. So at this stage, we want to be calling for the houses to be built to the 2025 standard, the Future Homes Standard, even though the law doesn't currently require that. And that will be to the advantage of the residents, it will be to the advantage of the town, and to the advantage of the environment. And it's worth bearing in mind that the people that buy these houses in the early stages before 2025, if they subsequently have to refit them, the same report I mentioned earlier suggests that the refit costs are going to amount to £26,300. Now, how they managed to come up with such a precise figure, I don't know, but that's what statistics do for us. So there's a nasty surprise waiting for people that aren't aware, which is that come perhaps 2040 or something like that, when there's real pressure to decarbonize these houses, then it's going to cost a very large sum of money, and it will be very disruptive to refit them to decent standards. So we really should be pushing at this stage to have them properly insulated and to have heat pumps fitted. And I think that's all I'd like to say on the matter for the time being.